The sun fell like molten lead over the parched fields of Nebraska. Arthur Mendez contemplated what once were his lands from the hill where his grandfather had built the small family house. At 56, his hands, weathered by decades of work, had lost everything except scars and calluses. The hot wind raised dust over the abandoned furrows that stretched like wounds in the land that no longer belonged to him. He took off his old straw hat, worn at the edges, and held it against his chest as he looked toward the horizon. The land never lies but men do, his father had told him, words that now seemed like mockery. For 3 generations, the Mendez family had worked these acres, had known every stone, every change in soil texture. And now, after the papers passed before the notary, everything belonged to someone else. "You're nothing but an ignorant farmer who never knew how to look beyond his own furrows," Ernest Valmont had told him, the landowner who now legally owned his fields. "This is progress, Mendez. The future isn't for men like you." The words had lodged like thorns in his throat. Each morning upon waking, Arthur felt them there, preventing him from breathing normally. He swallowed them along with the bitter coffee he now drank in silence, sitting at the small wooden table that his wife Dorothy had inherited from her mother. The memory of that day repeated like a worn-out film in his memory. The drought had begun 2 years earlier, but no one expected it to last so long. First it was the corn, then the beans. The earth cracked like old skin under the merciless sun. The wells dropped so low that the water came out turbid, tasting of minerals and despair. Arthur had gone to the town bank, that cold white building, where he always felt like an intruder. The loan seemed the only way out. Buy drought-resistant seeds, perhaps a more efficient irrigation system. He signed papers he barely understood, convinced that the next season would be better. But the rain didn't come. And with each month without a harvest, the interest grew like invasive weeds. The day of the auction, Arthur showed up in his best shirt, the one Dorothy ironed for town festivities. There was a knot in his stomach as he watched the men in suits, evaluating his land as if looking at an object in a store. Ernest Valmont, with his white skin that had never known work under the sun, offered the exact amount that covered his debt. "It's a bargain," he said to his companions without bothering to lower his voice. These farmers never understood the true value of what they had in their hands. Arthur clenched his fists until he felt his nails digging into his palms. He wanted to scream. He wanted to lunge at that man, but what good would it do? The shame weighed more than the rage. Neighbors, some lifelong friends, lowered their gaze when they crossed paths with him in town. Compassion hurt more than contempt. "A Mendez without land is nothing," his Uncle Richard told him the last time they saw each other. "What are you going to do now? Work for others? Better head west like everyone else." But Arthur couldn't conceive of the idea of abandoning the land where his parents and grandparents were buried, where each sunrise had a different color that he had learned to recognize since childhood. Dorothy supported him when everything seemed to be falling apart. "We have the house," she reminded him, "and our hands haven't forgotten how to work." They survived on the little Arthur earned as a day laborer on foreign lands and with the embroideries that Dorothy sold at the Sunday market. The wounded pride hurt more than hunger. Each day, passing by his former lands on the way to work, he felt something tearing inside him. "Are you listening to me, Mr. Mendez?" The voice of Jason, the mailman, tore him from his memories. The sun was still high and sweat ran down his back. "Sorry, boy. I was thinking. I brought you this." Jason extended a sealed envelope with the official state government letterhead. "They say it's important." Arthur took the envelope with distrust. Official letters had never brought good news for his family. He thanked the young man and waited for him to leave before opening it. His eyes scanned the document several times, trying to understand the formal and complicated words. It was a notification from the Agricultural Land Recovery Program. According to the explanation, they were evaluating cases of small farmers who had lost their properties during the drought for a possible buyback and redistribution program. A small tremor took hold of his hands. Could it be possible? He carefully folded the letter and put it in his shirt pocket, next to his heart. He didn't want to foster hopes that would later hurt more when they died, but something had ignited in his chest. That night, While Dorothy embroidered by lamplight, Arthur showed her the letter. "I don't want you to get too excited," she said cautiously, knowing well the pain they had gone through. "These programs promise a lot and deliver little." "I know," he replied, "but it's the first time in 2 years that something's moved." "What do you plan to do?" Arthur observed his rough hands, the deep lines of his palms. "I'll go to the meeting. I'll listen to what they have to say." The regional office was crowded with farmers like him, men and women with faces marked by the sun and worry. Arthur recognized several from his community and nearby towns. All had lost their lands for different reasons: droughts, floods, unpayable debts, legal deceptions. A young official named Michael Orozco explained the program. The government had allocated funds to recover misused or abandoned lands by new owners, prioritizing original farmers who wanted to implement sustainable methods. "It's not charity," the young man clarified. "It's an investment in the food security of our region." At the end of the presentation, they distributed forms. They seemed endless, full of legal terms and spaces for information Arthur wasn't sure he had. "I can help you," offered a young woman who introduced herself as Carmen, an assistant to the program. "Many of these papers are complicated even for us." Over the following weeks, Arthur gathered documents, looked for old titles, photographs of previous harvests, any proof that those lands had been productive under his care. The rumor about the program spread quickly through the town. One afternoon, while Arthur was having coffee in Matthew's small store, Ernest Valmont entered with 2 of his workers. Silence fell heavy as a slab. Valmont looked at him with a twisted smile. "So old Mendez thinks he can get his land back," he said loudly for everyone to hear. "Didn't you learn your lesson the first time? Those lands have an owner, and that owner is me." Arthur felt the heat rising up his neck. He gripped the cup between his hands. "The program is legal," he responded without raising his eyes. "I'm just following the procedures." Valmont approached until he stood in front of his table. "And you think a nobody like you can beat someone like me? I have lawyers, I have contacts, you can barely sign your name." The laughter of his companions echoed in the place. Arthur felt that every pair of eyes in the place was fixed on him, waiting for his reaction. The old Arthur would have bowed. His head paid for his coffee and left in silence, carrying the humiliation like a heavy burden. But something had changed in him since the arrival of that letter. He rose slowly, looking directly into Valmont's eyes for the first time. "I may not have your money or your influence," he said in a low but firm voice, "but I know those lands like the lines of my hand. I know where water springs even in the worst drought, where the soil holds more nutrients. You bought a piece of paper I lost my entire life." The silence grew denser. Valmont seemed surprised by the response. "You're going to regret this, Mendez," he muttered, before turning around and leaving the store. Matthew approached and put a hand on his shoulder. "Be careful, Arthur. That man is dangerous when he feels threatened." But the warning came too late. 2 days later, Arthur found the first threat nailed to his door, a piece of paper with letters cut out from a newspaper that said, "Abandon the program or abandon this life." Dorothy wanted to go to the police, but Arthur knew it would be useless. In rural areas, laws often bent before the power of money. "Maybe we should forget about all this," she suggested with fear in her eyes. "It's not worth risking what little we have left." That night, Arthur couldn't sleep. He went out to the small porch of the house and contemplated the stars, the same ones under which his father had taught him to read the signs of the weather, to listen to the silent language of the earth. "What would you have done, Dad?" he murmured. "To the darkness." The answer seemed to come with the wind that gently moved the leaves of the old avocado tree that shaded the house. "Dignity is neither sold nor given away," old Mendez used to say. "It's the only thing a poor man can leave as inheritance." The next morning, Arthur showed up at the program office. Michael Orozco welcomed him with a smile that faded upon seeing his serious face. "The threats have begun," explained Arthur, showing him the paper, "and they won't be the last." The young official frowned. "This is serious, Mr. Mendez. We can assign you protection, talk to the authorities, and it won't do any good." "I know how these things work," Arthur interrupted. "I just want to know if I really have a chance or if I'm risking everything for nothing." Michael looked him in the eyes. Your case is one of the strongest we have. The lands that Valmont bought are practically abandoned. He only uses them to speculate on the price. That goes against the spirit of agrarian reform and against the new land use laws. Arthur nodded slowly. Then I'll go ahead. The following weeks were torment. The threats continued, each more explicit than the last. Someone killed the chickens Dorothy raised. One night they found the tires of their old truck slashed. Fear settled in their home like an unwelcome guest. Dorothy prayed every night, holding tightly the small image of the Virgin Mary she had inherited from her grandmother. The date of the final hearing approached. It would be in the state capital, before a committee that would evaluate all the cases presented. Arthur prepared his best clothes, went over and over the arguments he would present, the reasons why he deserved to get his land back. The night before his trip, while they slept, a crash woke them. Something had impacted against one of the windows of the house. Arthur jumped out of bed, took the old machete he kept under the mattress and ran to the door. The fire was already spreading through the front of the house. Someone had thrown bottles with fuel. The flames quickly devoured the dry wood. "Dorothy," he shouted, running back to the bedroom. His wife was already up, hurriedly collecting the documents he had prepared for the hearing. "We need to get out," he shouted, taking her by the arm. They escaped through the back door as the fire consumed the small house where they had lived their entire married life. In the darkness, they thought they saw silhouettes moving away in the distance. They found refuge in Matthew's house. The old shopkeeper welcomed them without asking questions, offering them his small guest room. "You can't go to that hearing now," said Dorothy, with tears in her eyes. "They'll kill you." Arthur contemplated the flames that still rose in the distance, consuming the remains of their house. Everything they had was in there: the memories, the photographs, the few objects they had managed to keep. "If I don't go, they'll have won," he replied in a tired voice. "And what do we win? A piece of land in exchange for your life?" Arthur took his wife's hands in his. "It's not just a piece of land, Dorothy. It's our dignity." At dawn, Matthew took him to the bus station in his old truck. "Be careful," he warned. "I've heard Valmont is also traveling to the capital today." Arthur nodded. He had expected that. The 4-hour journey to the capital was like being suspended in a strange limbo. He looked out the window at the fields passing by at high speed. Some green and prosperous, others abandoned like his. The state government headquarters was an imposing building of pink stone. Arthur felt tiny as he entered, with his simple clothes and worn shoes, but he walked with a straight back as his father had taught him. The hearing room was full. He recognized several farmers from the program, sitting on wooden benches, as nervous as he was. And there was Valmont in an impeccable suit, surrounded by men who looked like lawyers. Their eyes met. The landowner smiled with contempt. An official called his name. It was his turn to present his case before the committee, formed by 3 men and 2 women with serious expressions. Arthur advanced to the center of the room. He had prepared a speech, but finding himself in front of those stairs, the rehearsed words evaporated from his mind. "My name is Arthur Mendez," he began, with a trembling voice. "I was a farmer in the community of St. Michael in Nebraska." He paused, swallowing. "I lost my lands 2 years ago due to debts caused by the drought. Mr. Valmont bought them at an auction." He indicated the landowner with a nod. "Since then, those lands are abandoned. They produce nothing while my family and I go hungry." One of the committee members interrupted him. "Mr. Mendez, do you have proof that the lands are not being used properly?" Arthur felt the world stop. The evidence was in the folder he had meticulously prepared, the same one that had burned with his house the night before. I had photographs, documents," he stammered. "But last night they burned my house. Everything was lost in the fire." A murmur ran through the room. Valmont leaned toward one of his lawyers, whispering something in his ear. "Are you accusing someone of that fire, Mr. Mendez?" asked another committee member. Arthur looked directly at Valmont. "I have no proof," he replied honestly, "but I do have this." Slowly, he took off his shirt, revealing his torso. The entire room held its breath. His back and sides were covered with recent burns, some still with blisters. "These are the proof of what I'm willing to endure. "To recover what is mine by right," he said in a clear voice. "I don't have papers to show you, but I have the marks of my struggle." The silence in the room was absolute. Even Valmont's lawyers seemed uncomfortable. "You can verify the fire," Arthur continued. "You can talk to the neighbors who witnessed it. You can check for yourselves that those lands are abandoned, that they produce nothing while there is hunger in our community." The president of the committee, a woman with graying hair and a penetrating gaze, observed him attentively. "Why are those lands so important to you, Mr. Mendez? We could offer you alternative parcels." Arthur slowly put his shirt back on. "Because my parents and my parents' parents are buried there," he replied simply. "Because I know every inch of that soil, and I know how to make it produce even in the worst times, because a man without roots is like a dry tree, ma'am. And I want to continue, bearing fruit." The hearing was suspended after his testimony. They told him the decision would be made in the coming days, that he would be officially notified. Arthur left the room with the feeling of having emptied his soul before those strangers. He didn't know if it had been enough, if his words would have had any effect against the power of money and influence. As he left the building, the fresh afternoon air hit his face. He felt strangely light, as if he had taken a weight off his shoulders, regardless of the outcome. Valmont was waiting. For him on the stairs, alone this time. "It was a good show," he said with disdain, "but it won't change anything. Those lands are legally mine." Arthur looked at him without fear, without hatred, almost with compassion. "Have you ever smelled the wet earth after months of drought, Mr. Valmont? Have you seen how the first green shoot breaks the surface and stretches toward the sun? That's what you bought, but you can never really own it." The landowner seemed disconcerted for a moment. Then he recovered his scornful expression. "Poetry doesn't feed stomachs, Mendez. Power does." Arthur smiled slightly. "Maybe you're right. Time will tell." 3 weeks later, an official envelope arrived at the small room that Arthur and Dorothy had rented with their meager savings. With trembling hands, Arthur opened it while his wife watched in silence. The resolution was complex, full of legal terms, but the essence was clear. The committee had decided to apply the social and productive interest clause. The lands would be recovered by the state and placed under a co-ownership regime between Arthur and 2 other farmers from the community who had also lost their parcels. It wasn't a complete victory. He wouldn't recover everything he had lost, but it was a beginning, an opportunity to sink his hands back into his land. Dorothy embraced him in silence, with tears in her eyes. "When do we start?" she asked. The return to the land was gradual. The first time Arthur stepped back onto his former fields, he knelt and took a handful of soil in his hands. He let it run through his fingers, feeling its texture, its smell. Valmont had appealed the decision, of course. The lawyers had filed. Resources had tried to block the implementation of the program. But this time, the law seemed to be on the side of the small farmers. With the help of the program and his new partners, Jack and Thomas, they began to implement sustainable agriculture techniques. They recovered ancestral water collection systems, combining them with new technologies that Michael helped them acquire. The first year was difficult. The land was eroded after so much abandonment. But little by little, with patience and knowledge, the fields began to green again. One afternoon, while working on building a small irrigation system, Arthur saw a man approaching along the path. It was Ernest Valmont, but he looked different. His elegant clothes had been replaced by simpler attire, and his face showed signs of worry. "Mendez," he greeted dryly. Arthur stood up, cleaning his hands on his pants. "Mr. Valmont," he replied calmly. "What brings you here?" The man looked around, observing the evident changes in the fields. "I've lost a lot of money in this legal battle," he finally said, "and I've heard that you all are getting good results with these new methods." Arthur waited, sensing there was more. "I have other lands," Valmont continued after an uncomfortable pause. "Further north, they're also abandoned, but they could be productive with the right guidance." The proposal hung in the air between them. Arthur would never have imagined this moment would come. "Are you asking for my help, Mr. Valmont?" The man looked away, visibly uncomfortable. "I'm exploring possibilities for mutually beneficial collaboration," he responded formally. Arthur smiled slightly. "Come tomorrow," he said simply. "We'll talk with Jack and Thomas. They must also agree." Valmont nodded before turning around and walking away down the same path he had come. That night, Arthur told Dorothy about it while they had dinner in the small house they had begun to build on the land, not far from where the previous one had stood. "Do you trust him?" she asked with concern. Arthur shook his head. "It's not about trust. It's about making the land produce, about feeding people. The rest is secondary." Months later, the cooperative they had formed with other farmers in the region began to expand. Even some of Valmont's lands were incorporated into the project under strict agreements for sustainable use and fair distribution of benefits. It wasn't a perfect ending. The struggle continued every day. There were bureaucratic obstacles, difficult seasons, internal conflicts in the cooperative, but the land was breathing again, bearing fruit. One afternoon, while watching a group of young people learning organic farming techniques under Dorothy's direction, Arthur instinctively touched his chest, where the scars from the fire still marked his skin. They were the permanent reminder of what he had been willing to lose and what he had gained along the way. The sun was beginning to hide behind the mountains, painting the sky orange and purple. The fields stretched before him, green and alive. They weren't completely his as before, but somehow that made them more valuable, shared as land should be. He put on his old straw hat and set off toward his house, where Dorothy would already have dinner ready. His steps were firm on the ground he knew so well. The earth breathed beneath his feet, and he breathed with it. How many men and women have been stripped of the land that fed their families? How many have felt the weight of humiliation that bends the back but doesn't break the spirit? If this story touched your heart, share it in the comments. Subscribe to hear other forgotten voices from the countryside and the city, and visit our playlist of moving stories to remember that we all carry scars that speak of invisible battles and silent victories.